Hey guys, Daniel here with Value Investing with Daniel. Thank you for tuning into this video. In this video, we're going to be discussing the fair value formula devised by Benjamin Graham to calculate the intrinsic value of a company. Now, I want to put a disclaimer right up front. Benjamin Graham himself did not use this method, okay? This was just one of the ways that he presented that could be seen as an alternative to a discounted cash flow in let's say a faster way without kind of doing a spreadsheet or anything like that. But he himself did not use this. Okay, Warren Buffett does not use this method. I don't use this method. I don't think that this is the way to go about valuing companies. But because everybody wants a secret. Everybody wants a simple thing where you just plug in numbers and get a result. And oh, look, it's 50% discount to the fair value is calculated by Benjamin Graham's formula. Therefore, it must be on sale. No, okay? That's not how it works. This is just, this formula here you'll find in The Intelligent Investor. But again, originally, Ben Graham came up with this formula to aid and assist people at getting an idea of what intrinsic value is. But there is no secret formula that you can actually use that's going to give you like a true answer. There are better ways of valuing companies. But anyways, the reason why I'm making this video is because if you're going to use this formula, you might as well use it right. And the vast majority of people don't know what they're doing, and they do it all wrong. All wrong. Everything that they do when they use this formula is wrong. And they don't really understand the nuances of this formula, even though, like I say, personally, I don't use it, but I know how to use it if I wanted to. But if you look at how the majority of people do it, they do it completely wrong. So let's go step by step. So the fair value formula is the earnings per share times 8.5 plus 2 times the growth rate times 4.4 divided by the current yield on 20-year AAA bonds. Okay, 20, you can use pretty much a 10-year AAA bond. It doesn't really matter, okay? The idea here, though, well, honestly, it's kind of strange because this should be in brackets here, but I don't know. Like, I just got this off the internet, but I realized that this should actually be in brackets. So just pretend that there are brackets here, okay? And this is 4.4 divided by this, and then this multiplies to that. But anyways, this is what I found. I didn't even really look at what I found online, but this should be in brackets, okay? Anyways, the idea here is that the fair value, basically, is the earnings per share, which in fact is not the conventionally reported earnings per share, but is actually the free cash flow per share. Because if you look at the adjustments that Benjamin Graham would make to the earnings per share when using the calculation, a more accurate figure would be the free cash flow per share. It's important to recognize that in Benjamin Graham's day, there was no statement of cash flows that were presented along with the income statement and balance sheet. You had to figure out what the free cash flow of the company was yourself from the income statement and balance sheet. But now, since like 1987 or 1986 or somewhere around there, give or take, they started mandating the statement of cash flows. That was after Benjamin's time and after he published these books, okay? So when Benjamin Graham is saying use the earnings per share, he's not talking about the earnings per share on the income statement. What he's actually referring to is what he calls the normalized and adjusted earnings per share, which is actually the free cash flow per share, more or less. So a better way of doing this, like if you look at everybody doing the Benjamin Graham formula online, they all use like the trailing 12 months earnings per share. That's so idiotic because, first of all, that's not even what he said to use. He said to use the adjusted and normalized earnings per share. That's his term, which is actually the free cash flow per share, more or less. So, and not only the trailing 12 months, the 5-year average typically, or the length of the business cycle average. It could be 3 years to 7 years. Typically, you would use 5 years. So, everybody gets this wrong. Everybody takes a trailing 12 months earnings per share, multiplies it by 8.5 plus 2 times the growth rate. They use the wrong growth rate. They use everything wrong when using this formula. And whoever wrote this even did it wrong because this should be in brackets, like I say, but whatever. The earnings per share has to be, in reality, you're not going to use the trailing 12 months earnings per share. Please don't. You're going to get everything wrong. What you use is you use the 5-year average free cash flow per share, okay? So if we go to Y charts here, and we see the free cash flow per share, I'm using Alphabet here in this case, we're going to use 3.14, okay? Do you see why there's a problem if we, look, the trailing 12 months earnings per share for Alphabet is like $5.26 or something. I don't know, I haven't checked it recently. Okay, $4. So it was $5.29 before when I did it last, but right now it's $4.94. Okay, if you use that instead of this, do you see what the problem is? Your value is going to be way out of whack and way too high, way too high. So you cannot use the trailing 12 months earnings per share for these growth companies. It will give you an extraordinarily high value, which is not usable and will screw you up completely. So please do not use the trailing 12 months earnings per share, okay? You have to use a number that's representative of the current earnings power of the business, which would be the 5-year average, typically free cash flow per share, not earnings per share, okay? The reason why, if you look in the Intelligent Investor, it's going to say earnings per share. But if you look at what he actually says and don't just look at the formula, he says to use the 5-year average adjusted and normalized earnings. And if you look at the adjustments he makes, they basically convert it into the current modern free cash flow per share. Okay, so that's why I recommend you use this number, which is the 5-year average free cash flow per share, not the what's it called, the trailing 12 months earnings per share. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. So we do not use trailing 12 months earnings per share for this variable. We use the 5-year average free cash flow per share, okay, times 8.5 plus 2 times the growth rate. So if you actually look what Benjamin Graham says, he says he would use a growth rate up to 15%. That would be the absolute maximum that he uses. And he would only utilize half of the historical revenue growth rate. So if a company has grown its revenues at 10% per year, guess what growth rate he's using for his free cash flows and earnings? 5%. Okay, so he would use half the revenue growth, not even 75% of the earnings growth. He would use half the revenue growth. So keep in mind how low that growth variable number is going to be. If we look at Alphabet, right, and we look at their earnings per share growth, let's say, their 5-year growth, well, they've been growing at like 37% per year. There is no way that you can plug that into this formula and expect to get a conservative result. You have to use revenue growth because it's almost always going to be slower than earnings growth. So if we look at the earnings growth, or the revenue growth, and we can use the 5-year growth, and what I recommend you do is you take this average. He would take half of this up to a 10% number, or up to maybe a 15% number. So in this case, we would use, let's say 20 divided by 2 is 10. So for our G in this formula, for our growth rate, we would pick 10. And we also have to look at the economic characteristics of the business, like the market share and where the room is for actual growth in the company itself in terms of the industry position and so forth. So don't think you can just pick a number because that's what it's done historically. You also have to look at the where it can still grow in terms of its markets, okay? So 2 times G in this case would be 10 times 4.4 divided by the yield on the AAA bonds, basically. The reason why you're doing this is because you're adjusting it for current interest rates. So in terms of, like, let's say we just do this for Alphabet just for fun, okay? So basically what we would have to do here is we would take the earnings per share, which remember is not the trailing 12 months earnings per share. If you use the trailing 12 months earnings per share, it's going to give you a number that's way too high and is not consistent with the current sustainable earnings power of the business, okay? I believe the free cash flow per share 5-year average was 3.14. Let's just confirm here. Free cash flow per share. Yeah, so we used the 5-year average, 3.14, okay? Now, we multiply this by 8.5, remember, see how I put the brackets here, plus 2 times the growth rate. We said that the growth rate was 10. Why? Because it's grown its revenues at 20% per year, so we're going to be ultra conservative and say that the free cash flow growth rate is going to be half of the historical revenue growth rate at a maximum. Now, keep in mind, you also have to look at, like I say, what is the industry? What's the room for growth? If it's saturated the markets, forget about it. You're not going to have any substantial growth within that market. So you got to also look at other factors, not just the historical patterns and trajectories, okay? So let's look at it here. 8.5 plus 2 times 10 And then we take all of this basically and we multiply it by, in this case it's like 4.4 divided by the current, divided by the current interest rate. Let's just put A. Okay? Bond. Okay, so let's solve for this side of the equation first. Okay, we got 8.5 plus 20 times 3.14. So we got here $89.49. Where's my mouse here? $89.49. And we have to adjust for current interest rates. Now, why do this? Why times 4.4 divided by the interest rate? Because at that time, he used the 8.5 as the standard base for a non-growth company at the interest rates at that time. But now, because the interest rates could be varying, what we're doing is we're multiplying by 4.4 divided by the interest rate. Let's say the current interest rate is very low. Let's say it's 2.2. Then what that means is that we're actually going to have twice the value in this sense, right? Because this is going to simplify to 2, so this would double. This would mean it's worth now 180, because the stock value is going to be correlated to your interest rates. But obviously we know that the current AAA interest rate is probably somewhere close to maybe 5% or somewhere along those lines. So if the current interest rate is, let's say, around 5%, then actually we will get a number that's slightly lower than this. Let me just look up really quickly what the current AAA bond rate is. I believe it's going to be around 5%. Yeah, so actually right now it's very close to 4.4. So we can just simplify this to be 4.4. And that would just give us a multiplier of 1 based on current interest rate, so we can just eliminate this. So this would be basically the current intrinsic value. If interest rates were super high, like let's say 8%, then that means that this would be then divided by 2 and give us a value for the company close to $45 instead of 90. So that's the way that you do this. Keep in mind, like I say, when you're doing this, you can't use a trailing 12 months earnings per share. The value is going to be too high. So this is saying a current fair value price for Alphabet would be around $90 per share. That means if you could find it for 45 or 50 or 60 selling for that, then that would give you a hint that it's underpriced. But this is, like I said, this is not the way that I would do it personally. I think that this is too simplistic, and Benjamin Graham would agree. He would say that this is not a good way to value companies. There are better ways that he invented and came up with, and there are more modern ways that are much more superior to this method. This is a shorthand method. Really, I would not recommend that you use this method at all, but if you think it's great and you want to do it, be my guest. Anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, and if you have any questions, you can always ask in the comment section. Thanks.